Okay, so here we go. So everyone should be able to see my slides right now. So if you could, just someone send me a instant message right now, just to make sure that I can see your question and make sure that you got it. Yeah, thanks, Shelley. Okay, we're good to go. Well, this is Wes Anderson, and it's a pleasure to have everyone here this evening. We're going to be recording this for others that will be coming on, be able to watch it online. This is the second webinar that we've hosted on Pet Tutor, and we've had lots of suggestions in the user group. So thanks everyone for making your suggestions in the user group. We're going to pick up some of those, get into some more detail. And one area that I'd like to especially focus on at some point is the application area. So hopefully we'll be seeing some applications, and I'm going to ask for some of our users that would be interested to join in with us and maybe share something they've been doing. So maybe do some co-presenting down the line. Some folks have been doing some really cool stuff with Pet Tutor, so this would be another way to share some of that. So tonight we're going to really dive into the computer software that runs on the laptop. I'll try to make a distinction between the computer software that we have now on the laptop and the new stuff that's coming out as an app on the smartphones and tablets. So those are different things. Tonight we'll focus just on the computer software generally running on a laptop or a desktop, either a Mac or a PC running Windows. So that's what the context is for this evening. And, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our, really enjoy getting these pictures and messages that get posted on the user group. This one's from Sarah Owings, who used the Quick Start guide that we talked about last time to actually do some stuff with her pet tutor and get her dog into some duration behavior. And you can see that is the pet tutor look. If any of you have seen that, I know my own dog, he gets hypnotized at the pet tutor. So thanks, Sarah, for sharing that one. So here's the agenda for this evening. We're going to get just a quick little question for you, and I've got a little prize to go along with that. And if you can answer that question, just the first person to type the answer to that, so that'll be coming up in the next slide here, you'll be able to provide an answer through instant message for the question. And again, just a reminder, this is Q&A anytime. So anytime you have a question, just type it into the chat area. You should see a little chat bubble on your Join Me toolbar somewhere. And I'm going to keep this muted again for those that are just joining in now. And I'll take a break and open up the mics a little bit later. So Q&A anytime. Just send me a question by instant message, and I'll try to answer that. So the main two parts of the program are going to be installing the program and how to use it. And so those are going to be the two big takeaways for this evening. So here's the question. Here's a fun fact worth big prizes. What should you do on the remote immediately after unplugging the USB cable from a charge, or when you've been using the computer, like we're going to talk about tonight with the program? There's one thing that's really important to do on the remote as soon as you unplug it. You've got 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Oh, Sherry got it. All right, there's our winner. So way to go, Sherry. Okay, so oh, whoa, so many prizes. I've unleashed them. Thank you. Very good answers. So we'll send out a prize for that. And let's see who all did that. Yeah, Sherry, Shelley, Tina. Okay, so we'll send you guys a prize. If you guys would send me an email, wes@smartanimaltraining.com, Sherry, Shelley, and Tina, just to remind me, and we'll get you a little gift card out in the mail. Thanks again. So you guys have it right. So press button 1. The reason you do that is when the remote is plugged into the charger or plugged into the computer, it disables the sleep timer that's internal to the remote, and that saves the battery. So when you unplug it, if you don't re-enable that sleep timer, the remote will stay on. And we've had people say, oh, my remote's not staying charged. And I actually can't think of a single time where the problem wasn't they forgot to push button 1. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and it's relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight, because we're going to talk about how you plug the remote into the computer and use it. So when you're completely done, that's the last thing you should do, is press button 1. So if you take away nothing from tonight, push button 1. Okay, just a few questions that have come up along the line. I'm going to try to answer some of those. And if this might answer some questions for you along the way. The first one is, do I need Bluetooth to run the laptop computer program? No. The Bluetooth allows us to talk to the smartphone or tablet. So that's not necessary for the program we're talking about tonight. Do I need software to run Pet Tutor? I think most folks online tonight know the answer to that, and the answer is no. You can just simply use the factory settings, and that works pretty well for a lot of applications. But if you're building duration on a behavior and you want to change the time, that can be handy to be able to do that. Does the remote need to stay connected? Yes. While you're changing parameters, or if you're doing internet training, the remote needs to be plugged in with the USB cable all the time. There's my little push button 1 reminder again. Should the feeder be turned on when using the program? This is really important. Both the remote and the feeder need to be on, and the remote plugged into the computer when you're using the program. There's a lot of conversation back and forth between the feeder and the remote in the computer, and all three of those have to be able to talk to each other. Yeah, here's a question that's come up occasionally. This is really more for Apple products running like the Macintosh. Click on the icon on my desktop, but nothing happens. Sometimes an app will get, or a program will get loaded and be on the toolbar and won't relaunch. So if you just go down to the toolbar or up at the top, the toolbar at the top, and quit the program, most likely the program is already running. And I've had this happen to me on other programs that are running on the Mac. So it can fool you and think it's not launching, but in fact it's already running and just doesn't open up. So just the fix for that is to quit and restart your program. Now this is one just come in just recently. I get connect errors when trying to connect the remote, and I'll show you what that is on the software. But there's a spot on the software where you have to connect to the remote, and then that internal connect to the feeder. But sometimes there'll be an error that can pop up, and we've got a little error message that says like the feeder's not turned on or the remote's not connected. Now, something that has happened recently, which is really, really strange, the computer system, now this is specific to Apple. Normally the Mac works really well with the Pet Tutor program, but we just had recently a little hiccup. And Apple has rolled out El Capitan, which is the newest operating system. That's 10.11 on the on Apple for running on Macs, for instance. And the El Capitan runs okay, but when you do the upgrade to El Capitan, which is version 10.11, the Pet Tutor software starts having some weird connection problems. And we're hoping Apple will get this fixed, but this is the first time since we've been running on Apple that we've seen that problem. But it's really weird, and I'd like to thank Joel. I don't know if Joel's online, but he's one of our Pet Tutor users that brought that to our attention. In fact, had a quick solution for it. So that's what's going on. And the fix for that, if you do go through the upgrade, it only happens when you've installed the Pet Tutor software and then you do the El Capitan upgrade. and then it will not work. So the best way to take care of that is just to uninstall the Pet Tutor and reinstall it. And that's easy enough to do. Okay. So talking about installing, that's what this next segment is going to be about. How to install the Pet Tutor software. So the first thing we have to do is just get everything connected. And you'll see the what I have here, the laptop is running, and we've got the remote. The first thing you want to do is just plug the remote into the laptop using the USB cable. There's a micro connection on one end and a regular USB on the other. That is a standard cable. Most cell phones, smartphone cables are micro USB. Those will work as well. We include one with Pet Tutor, but quite a few off-the-shelf USB cables will work for that as well. The next thing you want to do is turn the feeder on, and that allows it to then talk to the remote. And the reason that we do that is some of the settings that we're going to change are stored in the remote. The remote has a little microcomputer and memory that stores some of our settings, as well as the feeder. So some of those settings that you're going to change are stored in either the feeder or the remote. So that's why all of those have to be up and running. That you don't need to remember that, but that's just for those if you're curious as to why those all have to be connected. That's the reason. Some of the parameters we're changing are all the way out in the feeder. So when you change something like the timed interval, that's a parameter that gets stored in the feeder, and that will stay on whether you power down or power up the feeder. Once you make that change, it'll stay there until you change it again. Okay, so that's the connection. First, connect the remote to the laptop, then turn the feeder on, then start the program. And when we're installing, I'm going to jump out of this in a minute and show you where you go on the website to download and install the software. I'm guessing that quite a few of you have done that already, but if you haven't, this will be a nice review of how to do that. There is a program that we have written for the PC running on Windows or on the Apple OS X operating system. And the newest one I just mentioned earlier is El Capitan 10.11, and it'll work all the way up through the current one. The main difference between the PC version and the Apple version is the Apple does not require the separate driver. And you'll see what I'm talking about when we go to the website. For the PCs, the PC has to have another piece of software you have to download, a second one, and that's the driver. And that gets missed sometimes by folks. And then the software is keyed, so you can only use it and unlock it if you have purchased the programmable package or if you add the software later. So we do discount the software if you purchase it at the time you get the Pet Tutor, but you can add it anywhere along the line, and then we'll provide a key and you can download and unlock it and it'll work with your system. Okay, so this is where you go to get the software. That you just type in, I've got the, can you use the same software for multiple Pet Tutors? And yes, the answer to that is yes. When you purchase that, we know which units you have and we'll provide you the key for any of your systems. So you don't have to have different different computer software for multiple systems. So you can use one software for all systems. The area that I've circled here is to download the laptop software and the driver. And let's see if I can get that to work. Oop. All right, I had that hot linked. So there we go. So now I'm out on the site. So just go to smartanimaltraining.com/support or pettutor.biz/support. Those URLs will take you to the same place. And here we have the links to the to the software. And we have some descriptions of first for the PC running on Windows. It says requires Windows 7 or 8 or higher. I've known people to run this on Vista, XP. We've only written it to run on 7, but I know folks that are running older versions of Windows. If you have that, you should be able to run it on even older Windows versions. The first thing you need to download from this site is this driver. And so you just click, I'm not going to do that, but you click on that and it'll download. It's a zip file, and then you unzip that and then save it to some folder on your desktop is fine. And that is the driver that you're going to need for the PC. Again, we only do this for the PC, not the Apple. Step 2 is to install the driver, and you'll right click. There's a file. When you unzip it, you'll see this weird file name. You can right click on that, and the newer versions of Windows, it should install the driver and you're done. The older versions of Windows, it's trickier, and we've added an optional. If you click on this link, it'll bring up a PowerPoint presentation that walks you through how to install on Windows 7 or older machines. It's just they work differently with the driver software. These first 2 steps, that's one time. Once you get the driver on your machine, you shouldn't ever have to do it again unless you buy a new computer and you'd have to reinstall the driver. You can always go out here on our website and download those. And then the last thing is to download and install the program itself. And this little suitcase is actually what you click to download the PC version of the software. That's a standard icon for downloadable PC software. Then you extract the software. Again, it's a zip file. And then you run the program installer to install the Pet Tutor Control Console. And then the last thing is you connect to the computer and you're off to the races, just what we talked about before in that previous slide. You connect, get all 3 devices going, computer, remote, and feeder, and then bring up the Control Console software. That's the way you do it for the PC. Right below that, then you'll see the Mac, and it's much newer. We tested this for Mac 10.8. They're now on, as I mentioned, 10.11. And so I've had people ask, well, why can't you make it work on older versions? Like a lot of developers, it's just time and money to create something that's for older, and most manufacturers, it's just not something we do. So we only support OS X 10.8 or newer. And it generally runs really well, with that one exception I told you about with the update to El Capitan. So you download this and install it on your Apple Mac, and you're ready to go. So that's the install process. And let's see. There we go. So I'm going to just pause for a second. Any questions about the installation? I'm going to open up the. So I just opened the mics just in case if anyone has a question, burning question about the installation process itself. Nope. Assume Windows 10 compatible. Yes, I have had people tell me that they've been running it on Windows 10 and it's been working. So you should be good on Windows 10. Okay, good question. All right. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to mute and we're going to. Okay. So, let's see. The next one is how to use the program. And so if you've got everything hooked up and you've started the Pet Tutor software, this is the screen that you'll see pop up. and I'm going to actually run that here for you. So I'm going to exit out of this and bring up. Now here is the Pet Tutor software. And so you'll see that I'm already connected. So I plugged in the remote. The button over on the right-hand side is that one has to do with um, being able to connect to the feeder and the remote. It says disconnect now, so if I pushed on it, it would disconnect us from the remote, so I don't want to do that. So when you first fire it up, it'll say connect, and you'll press that. And what I always like to do, the very first thing, once it gets connected and everything looks like it's working okay, then I like to push the feed button. And if you heard that and you saw that little flash, it's now the feeder is now dispensing. So that beep came from the Pet Tutor feeder. That's one way to make sure all the connections are working. So just push that feed button just to ensure that everything's working. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are some of the values and how to change those. So let's say that we want to change the dispense interval. The factory settings, 5 seconds. So if you don't change anything, it comes from the factory, and you'll see the current values in the gray boxes over here. That's what it comes with from the factory, but if you change those, the gray box will update. So let's, instead of 5 seconds, let's make that 7. So now we're going to dispense a treat once every 7 seconds. The way I send that out and store it out in the feeder or the remote is to hit upload settings. And so now it's running, and you'll see, notice the current has now changed. So it was 5, it's now 7. So now that's now stored in a semi-permanent memory out in the feeder. So even if you turn it off, take the batteries out, that value will not change until you come back to the software. So that's a nice thing about these settings, is they stay there semi-permanent until you change them from the software. The values that you can, what you see here is the min and the max. That's the smallest value you can enter up to the largest number, which is 1800 seconds. You see the units are seconds. So that's every half an hour it'll drop a treat, once every half an hour. It's a pretty long duration, and that's satisfied most applications on the high end. The random ad percent in the previous webinar number 1. If you didn't see that one, you can go back. It's posted on the user group now. But we talked more about these settings. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of how you use those. There's a PDF file to explain how these work, and then there's also the recording of the webinar from last time. But if you wanted to change the random ad percent and make that, let's say, 50%, I can upload the settings. And so now I've changed 2 of the values that are out in the feeder. So now if we just started, if we wanted to just exit now, we can do that. So we could just leave the program, unplug the remote, and push button 1, remember. And now the remote and the feeder have the new program, have those new settings in them. So you no longer need to be connected to the computer. Once you've uploaded those and you see those in the gray box, they've been stored out in the Pet Tutor itself. So you no longer need the computer. I've had that question come up too. It's only when you're making the change that you have to stay connected to the computer. So if I want to change those back, that was a 0. Factory setting was a 5. And I can upload that value and upload that one. And there we go. And now I've set them back. So you can do that with any of these values. The first values here, down to bark dispense, those all have to do with timing of the dispense interval. So you can affect the bark pause, the dispense interval. So we can set it at 5 seconds up to a half an hour. The random ad percent goes up to 100%. Auto increment is in quarter-second increments. So if I put a 1 in the box, that means that each trial it will increment 1/4 of a second, 0.25 seconds, very small amount. It'll slowly creep the interval up. And then the bark pause, the factory setting is 20 seconds, but you can change that to up to a half an hour too. So these are probably the values that get changed the most with a laptop program when people are doing timed interval dispenses and using the bark pause. You can change these bottom two, the sleep timers in the feeder and the remote. I don't recommend that. They typically, the factory settings are 15 minutes for the feeder and 3 minutes for the remote. If you do make those larger, it can affect the battery life. And so if you make the remote stay awake longer, it will run the battery down faster, and same thing for the feeder. Now, if you were worried about the remote going to sleep during some operation, we've built into for the automatic modes for the timed interval dispense. You really don't even need the remote in that case. Once you set the feeder in a timed interval dispense, the remote is no longer needs to be in the area. You could leave town with the remote and the feeder wouldn't care. It'd keep dispensing on the timed interval. But for the tilt and the sound detection mode, the remote will tell the feeder not to go to sleep. So in those automatic modes, if you're playing the wobbler game and it goes on for more than 15 minutes, that's fine. The system has been set up to temporarily disable that sleep timer while one of those automatic modes is running. When you drop back to manual mode, then the sleep timer is reactivated. So I would not change those. It's my suggestion that you leave those settings for the sleep timer the same. People have made changes, and that's fine. That's what it's there for. But most of the time, you don't need to do that. Okay. Any questions? So this is probably the page that gets used the most. I'm going to come back to the time of day. That's this next tab. But I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to go to the sound in the tilt mode. These change the sensitivity settings. I think the factory settings work pretty well. I really wouldn't change most of those. The thing that you might want to change, though, is over here on the right-hand side. It's the sound trigger type. And if you, I think on the last webinar, we talked about the two types of sound triggers. The microphone is built into the remote, and so it can either trigger the feeder, or when you're in the bark reduction mode or the bark silent mode, it will suspend the time dispense for a period of time. So that's how the sound sensor is used. And the voice trigger is for a single sound. So like if I wanted to just trigger the feeder with my voice, I'd say yes, and it would trigger the feeder. That's just a single sound, and most of the time in the way we ship it, that's the way it ships from the factory. If you want to make it recognize a clicker specifically, and here's the sound, you can hear this. That double click, we've programmed the remote when it's in this clicker trigger or double sound mode. It will only trigger if it hears those two sounds within 500 milliseconds, or it's half a second of each other. So it's got to be pretty quick. So this would not trigger it. 1001, 1002, that's 2 seconds. That's too long. That is typically the speed at which a clicker trainer would use a mechanical clicker. And so we've made it very sensitive to that double click sound. And we did allow you to change the setting between those two, but I found most of the time half a second is quite sufficient to make it recognize the clicker. Why would you want to do that? A real good application is if you're in a noisy environment, this voice trigger mode, and so now we're switching over to the voice trigger mode, that may pick up other sounds in the environment and give you a false trigger. So that's one of the reasons you might want to go to the clicker trigger mode. You could also use that to tune out sounds if you're going to do over the internet training. So you can actually use our remote and put it next to a speaker on a laptop and use the webcam and all that set up so it'll trigger, you can trigger it remotely with a clicker, and it wouldn't pick up sounds in the room. So that's the sound and tilt settings. The internet setting is pretty simple. We call this the big ass speed button for obvious reasons. One of the reasons that we made this button so big is if you do this on, this is for training over the internet where you can watch the animal and dispense a treat. And you would do that. You could do that on your phone, and that's why another reason we made this button really big. So the person on the other end of the internet, wherever you're talking to, can see that button on their laptop or their smartphone, and they'll be able to trigger it. And you can, if you share your laptop, bring up this computer program, and then you can share this. Join Me, you can do it with Join Me. You can do it with TeamViewer, Google Remote Desktop. There are several packages now that will allow you to do remote access. And then you can just cursor over and push that button, this great big blue button here for the internet control. The logger is not something we typically get into, but it will allow you to log events. And so if I just triggered the feeder, if you heard that, and we got a whole bunch of messages spit out here. So this is the raw communication between the remote and the feeder. And so these are all commands that are going back and acknowledgments between the feeder and the remote. And there's a date and time stamp. So this is more for troubleshooting, but you could actually use this to record when certain events happen, like bark detection and that sort of thing. This last button here is one that allows us to remotely troubleshoot the system. So we can read all the values in either the feeder or in the remote with this. So we could remote in and help you troubleshoot your system and look at the values and settings. Typically, a customer wouldn't want to do that, so it's more for factory use. Now let me go to the last tab, and that one is the time of day triggers. And so this is really very powerful tool. Can also get confusing. There's a lot of settings. I'm going to walk through these one at a time. I'm going to start down here in the lower left-hand corner, though, because the first thing you have to do is set the internal clock. And so if you see this, the current feeder time right here, and I've got, I don't have any value set. That tells me that I've not loaded the time yet from the feeder. So the first thing I want to do is refresh the time. So I'm grabbing, there's a 24-hour clock out in the feeder. And so here's the current time setting for the feeder. Now, if I wanted to change that and make that, let's say, 1800, this is in military time, 1800, say 1830. I'm going to upload that to the feeder. So now I'm changing the feeder clock. And so now you see current time is 1830 in a little bit. So this is the first thing you have to do is make sure the 24-hour clock is set. We don't have a date. So these triggers, the time of day trigger, this is the way it works. You've got up to 4 of them that can be set out in the feeder. Each one of these, you tell the feeder what time you want it to wake up, and that's what this inner time of day is about. You tell the feeder, I want you to wake up here at a particular time of day, again on the 24-hour clock. I want you to dispense a certain quantity of food. And this is in rough cups. And you can tell down in this lower corner, if you take let's say a cup of kibble or a half a cup, and you pour it in the feeder and you keep cycling it until it's empty, that tells you how many cycles per cup for the type of food that you're using. So you calibrate it that way. We have 100 or 110 as a typical number of cycles for a cup of food, but that's going to vary a lot. So you can count your just let the feeder count out the cycles, and then you put that in there, and that will tell it how many cycles to run to get a certain quantity of food. And then this is the dispense interval between each one of those dispense cycles. I want you to delay so many seconds. And notice we also have the bark pause here. So the setting that we made over on that first tab for timers or bark pause, that's the time that's going to be set right there. So if you have a 25-second bark pause, when you turn it on this screen, that it'll be 25 seconds. And then overall, you just enable the timer by clicking that on. So let me go ahead and show you how to do that. I'm going to refresh. So let me get rid of my markings here. Clear that. And so now I can turn the time of day trigger on. So let's make that at 9 o'clock in the morning, or let's make it 8:45. Let's say the mailman comes by at 9 o'clock, and I want to start dispensing treats 8:45, and I want that to run for my dog he has 2 cups of kibble in the morning, so I'm going to make that at 2 cups of kibble, and I want that to run for 10 seconds or so. So it's going to start running, and I want to enable the bark pause. Okay. And so now, if I click on, now I have enabled time of day trigger number 1. So what does this mean? Okay, every day at 8:45, the feeder will wake up, dispense 2 cups of kibble based on how many we have. Typical is about 110 cycles per cup. It'll wait about 11 seconds between each one, and I've turned on the bark pause. So if the dog barks during that time, it'll stop. So that's how we can enable automatically the system to wake up and run a program, and you can do that. Maybe somebody else comes along in the afternoon. You could set time of day trigger number 2, number 3, number 4. So that is the time of day trigger. I'm going to turn that off. I don't want that enabled, and I'm going to refresh that. And so now I've disabled the first one. All the values are there, so all I have to do is hit enable on, and that'll turn it back on. Now, one caution, and this is really important. So if you get a time of day trigger set and you enable it, it will run that program no matter what. Even if you turn the feeder off, it's designed to wake itself up and run that program. We've had people call and say, something spooky is happening with my pet Tutor. At 3 in the morning, it just starts running all on its own, and I had it turned off. So what's happening is the time of day trigger was set up and didn't get disabled, and so it's running at some ungodly hour. So you want to make really sure, and the only way to disable that is you have to go back to the computer software and turn off that enabled button here, and that'll disable it, just like I've done here. So that, and you could do those. They're all completely independent. So time of day trigger 2 doesn't rely on anything from time of day trigger number 1. And then once you've got all that, you just upload those settings, and that will send all that information out to the feeder. And again, it does not require the remote to run this cycle unless you have the bark pause on. Then the remote you have to have the remote on because it has to tell the feeder to when there's a bark. So those are all the tabs, all the settings on the software. So we've gone through the timers, the sleep timers, time of day triggers. We just went through those. Sound and tilt. Most likely you're going to either want to use single sound or double sound. The internet, the big feed button, the logger, and the factory diagnostics. And then this one shows up on all the screens, this big feed button. You can You can remote in and trigger the feeder from this one as well. Just another way to trigger it. I like to use it just to periodically test to make sure the feeder is connected. So that, I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. This one I thought would be a little shorter unless you have some questions. Let's see. Yep. So that was the overview of the Pet Tutor software, how to change all the settings, how to install it. Just to recap the support page, the Facebook, we love all the comments and the customer interaction there. We don't really monitor it and we can't track it. It's really important we get enough emails coming in. It's hard to track a request for something unless it's logged in our support ticket system, and there's a ticket that's open and we know whether it's been answered or not. So it's pretty easy to get lost on Facebook if you've asked a question and we don't respond. So if you really want customer support, please log a ticket there at this line. And there are lots of great resources on the Facebook page. We're adding more all the time. When I finish the recording tonight, this will be posted on the Facebook page, our helpline. And so I believe that brings us to any final questions anyone has. Any questions? Okay, I have now opened the mics again. And so if you have any questions, you can either type those or you can ask me through the mic. Any questions about this? Did this answer all of your burning questions about installing and using the software? No questions, Shelley. Okay, thank you. Okay. Give you just a second. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for attending tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you'd like to see some other topics covered, go ahead and post those on the user group. I got several ideas about other things that we're going to be talking about. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.